In dreamlike slowness, the door opened, and what appeared to be a man was half dragged, half carried out onto the snow. Gunnarsson could see bare shoulders before the blanket in which he was wrapped was pulled tighter around his head. He looked dead. The SD men maneuvered the body into the ravine. At a word from Rinnan, one of the men pulled out a gun, aimed, and fired into the brambles. As Gunnarsson expected, there was no sound from the long silencer. The snow was falling steadily now. The men seemed anxious to leave, hunkering down against the wind or wiping snowflakes off their shoulders as they walked back to the car. Rinnan got in. After brushing the windshield, the other two followed. The car roared to life. For a brief moment, the wheels spun in the wet snow. Then it rocked and slipped its way back down the road and out of Gunnarsson's line of sight. The woods became silent again. Cautiously, Gunnarsson stood up. Snowflakes covered his cap and grey beard like wet stickers. His hands were cold. God help me, he thought. When will it ever end? He readjusted his rucksack and stepped back up on the trail. The snow hissed about his grim face. He felt weak, a hollow emptiness gurgling in his stomach, but he knew he would have to go down to that terrible place and see for himself. He feared and hated Rinnan, but it was terrible to die by Nacht und Nebel orders, laid in an unmarked grave. He set off down through the trees and undergrowth. After some scrambling, he finally came out by the pile of earth and trees blocking the road. All that was left of the car was a rectangular patch of fuzzy new snow on the old. Gunnarsson looked down the road and felt sure that it was deserted. There was no reason for them to suspect that they had been watched. They were too sure of themselves. Besides, the snowstorm was picking up. At the bottom of the ravine he stopped. His heart beat heavily. His bowels growled. The brambles were already piling up with snow. It was hard to see, so, removing his rucksack, Gunnarsson began to knock the snow off the tangle of bare branches at the deepest point of the ravine. The body lay in the blanket like a mummy. A light veneer of snow already clung to it, but Gunnarsson still could see a neat hole near the top, where the blanket was stiff with blood. He crouched in closer, and then, taking a deep breath, pulled the blanket away. The young man was lying face down on his right cheek. He had been badly beaten. His eyes were shut tight, and his lips were swollen. The skin beneath the cuts and bruises was a ghoulish pale grey, a haunted mask in the failing light. Was he an illegal worker or some innocent caught in Rinnan's net? Gunnarsson pulled the blanket away further to reveal heavily bruised shoulders and a flailed and savagely beaten upper back. The man's hands were tied. His right shoulder was covered with fresh blood where the bullet had nicked the flesh on top of the collarbone. The gunman had nearly missed his target altogether. No matter. Nothing could be done for him now. Gunnarsson sighed. He knew there would be no identification. Nacht und Nebel prisoners were generally stripped for that very reason. He looked at the black-haired head, and in a moment of pity stroked it. Just like Nils, my son. The old grief returned. He closed his watery eyes. A slight gust of wind rose and sighed amid the falling snow. And then again. Gunnarsson's eyes sprung open, and abruptly he took his hand away from the head. You are imagining things, old fool, he thought. It's time to go. He gathered the edge of the blanket and looked at the face again. The battered lips were parted, something he hadn't noticed before. Was it possible? He searched for a pulse on the man's neck, cursing himself for not doing this sooner. Dead men did not bleed. His rough hand trembled. Nothing. Higher on the throat, he found a weak but fairly steady pulse. The young man was still alive. Alive! The old man was filled with a savage joy. Perhaps Rinnan had been cheated after all.